Hey guys, welcome to the channel. My name's Jared. Today I'm going to be modifying my EG Civic Coupe. I've picked up a Type R transmission from a DC2 off Marketplace, and I'm going to be switching out the transmission on my Civic. The transmission I currently have on my Civic is open LSD. It is 4.4 final drive, so it's not too bad. I'm not sure if my new one is 4.4 or 4.8. I hope it's 4.8, but if it's 4.4 I'm not going to be too upset, but I mostly got it just for the LSD. So I'm just planning to take this transmission out. I want to inspect the condition of the clutch at the same time and see whether we need to do a remain seal and possibly order a new clutch or replace that one if it's worn out. I haven't changed a clutch or pulled the transmission on a B series before, so it's going to be the first time for me. It doesn't look too difficult, so follow along as I try to work out how to swap the transmission. When removing the axle, you're going to need to put a pry bar between the axle and the transmission and lever it out to pop the axle out from the circlip, and make sure you put a drip tray underneath to catch any oil that leaks. To separate the half shaft, you're going to need to use a pry bar or a hammer between these two faces. For me, I had to use a hammer just on the edge of the drive shaft, just here, to knock it loose, and then you can remove the shaft out and then move on to the intermediate shaft. There's one here, and one here. just a bit of an update, but I've removed that transmission bolt holding the bell housing on, and also I've taken the exhaust off just to make this easier to see. But I've taken off those mounts at the bottom and the inspection cover for the flywheel. And now these two big bolts here that are holding the T-bracket on, you'll need to remove them. And the top one you'll have to get from the other side, and this one bolt on the left here will also need to come off, and then we can do everything else from the top. So now we're almost ready to pull the gearbox. You're going to need to loosen this bolt because we're going to have to remove it so the mount and the transmission can drop down. I've just currently got a jack with a piece of wood supporting the engine, so I can take that bolt out and the engine won't drop down. So I got a jack supporting the transmission now as we take it out, and it's going to drop down. What I like to do is just hold it on each side and wiggle it out until you get a gap like that. Then you want to support it on the jack and slowly lower it down. I had to end up taking off this mount here just so we could clear the chassis rail of the car to fit under there, and then I was able to get the box out quite easily. I just took the clutch off, and the flywheel condition looks pretty good. There's not really any hot spots on it. Looks pretty standard, and also the rear main seal's not leaking, which is great. And then the clutch disc here is just organic, as I suspected. But there's actually quite a bit of material still on the clutch disc. So I think that's still pretty good to go again. And the pressure plate doesn't have any hot spotting on it either. I think it's pretty good. And I first thought this was an extreme clutch, but it says Seco on it, which I haven't personally heard of before. I just want to touch on the differences between an LSD and a non-LSD B series transmission. So first of all, you can look at the barcode or sticker on the transmission to identify what type of transmission it is. So in this case, I had a S21 in the car originally, and the one that I've picked up is an S80 transmission. First thing you can tell if it's an LSD is that it will have stamping on the bell housing that says LSD, and you can see on this non-LSD transmission there is no writing. In the case that the writing has worn away or someone's removed it, if you look in the section where the drive shaft goes in, you can see straight through to the other side. Now on an open diff transmission, you have this pin or bar that goes through the middle that stops one drive shaft going through to the other side, and that is an open diff. Apart from that, the two transmissions look almost identical. Now is also a good time to check the drive shaft seals as well, just in case yours is leaking. I did notice that this speed sensor is slightly different in construction to the LSD one, but the plug is the same on both of them. So I'm just going to go and put this transmission in first, just in case there's some sort of different gear on this for the speed than that's in the old one. and I'll try it with this plug, and if not, then I can switch over the speed sensor assembly. The LSD transmission also has a plug on the reverse switch, whereas on my old transmission it didn't, and I had to actually unscrew it as part of the harness. My transmission also has this bracket for the clutch slave cylinder, and this one doesn't, so I need to switch that over. And also the torque mount on the front, I need to switch to the new transmission. So I just reinstalled the clutch as I shown you before. It was in good condition. Next I'm going to tackle these steering rack bushes that have been in the car for probably the 500,000 Ks that this car's done, and replace them with these hard race polyurethane bushes. These are a very important mod that are very much overlooked, because those bushes translate a lot of the steering feeling that you get from the road, from the tie rod ends, into the steering column that you feel with your hands. So really worn bushes aren't going to transmit the road feeling very well. Just an update, I've got those new steering rack bushes installed. It's not an easy job. I wouldn't recommend doing it unless you absolutely have to. If you want to do it, you're going to need to disconnect those two lines so you can pull the steering rack off a bit. You'll also need to remove that plastic cover over the steering shaft and loosen the universal joint so you can actually push the steering rack out. Next step is I'm going to transfer the brackets and the bolts onto the new transmission, as well as the clutch pivot fork and release bearing, as the old one is better than the new one. So when you're trying to remove the clutch pivot fork and bearing from the transmission, it's best if you remove the side rubber boot cover, and then from in there you can actually get access to behind the pivot ball. This little clip inside of the arm actually holds it over like this, so you'll just need to use a screwdriver behind it to pop it out, and then the clutch fork will come off. The bearing and the holder just slide off of the end of the fork. To test whether your bearing is good or not, you want to give it a spin. Notice how this one doesn't make any noise, and this other one. So this one's on its way out. It could still be used, it's not loose or anything, but the other one that I already had in my transmission was much better. When you reinstall the fork, you want to put a little bit of grease on these tabs here, one in the ball here which the slave cylinder pushes on, and some in here which the clutch pivot ball mounts on, and then you want to put a little bit of grease on the clutch pivot ball and some on the shaft as well, so that the inside of the bearing can actually move freely in and out of the shaft. And I recommend you clean those surfaces first and get any old grease off which might be dry. Just an update, I've got the transmission in and I've just got this engine mount on. So just recapping, I did take me a couple times to get it in, but what I ended up doing was, again, just removing it, lowering the engine down on an angle and using another jack underneath the transmission to lift it up. I did end up removing this bracket on the side of the gearbox just because it was hitting on this hose here. Then I got it up into position and I sort of cradled the engine underneath like this and wobbled it in, and then I just started this bolt at the top here because it's easiest to get to hold it, and then pulled it in with the rest of the way with that, and another bolt just a bit lower down. And then at that point I just jacked it back up the engine after being tilted, and I got this mount on. I also had to undo the T-bracket mount bolt on the engine there to get enough tilt to lower it down. Just another update. I've thrown the downpipe back on and connected the exhaust up. I also put the intermediate shaft in, the starter motor, all of the bell housing bolts, slave cylinder and lines, earth strap, and also the inspection cover as well. And plugged everything back in, all of the sensors, the distributor, the park switch, and I also filled up the power steering with fluid because I drained that slightly when doing the steering rack pushes. The slave cylinder seems to be bled, like I didn't take it apart, but the clutch pedal feels really quite soft at the moment. Did confirm that the fork is going all the way in and back and the pedal's not getting stuck, and I re-bled it, but I'm not sure. Maybe I just can't remember how the pedal feels, but it feels quite soft. It is just an organic upgraded clutch, so maybe it is alright, but I hope nothing's wrong with the installation. I guess if it wasn't aligned it wouldn't have gone in, and I can still move the clutch fork, so it's not like it came off or anything when it was getting installed. So I'm just going to wrap it up here at the end of this video. I'm not going to install the drive shafts just yet, because in the next video we're going to be changing out these Tane coilovers and this damaged tie rod end, and I got some BC coilovers to throw on, as well as some rear toe adjustable arms and a new tie rod end. So in the next video we'll tackle the suspension and we'll wrap up the last bit of the gearbox, and then we'll have to align the car and finally take it for a drive. Stay tuned for the next video. Thanks for watching.